The storm had been Ilara's constant companion for the last 2 hours, a relentless drummer against the roof of her vintage car as she navigated the winding country lanes. Now, as she turned onto the gravel path leading to Blackwood Manor, the rain intensified, blurring the ancient oaks that lined the drive into shadowy giants. She loved a good storm, especially when it promised the kind of isolated solitude she craved. The manor, a sprawling, elegant edifice of dark stone and ivy, was her sanctuary for the weekend, or so she thought. She'd booked it specifically for its remote charm, hoping to lose herself in a manuscript, far from the insistent demands of her London life. Parking beneath the Gothic arch of the portico, Ilara turned off the engine, plunging the world into a sudden muffled quiet, save for the furious drumming of the rain and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The air, even within the car, was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her umbrella, her fingers brushing the cool leather of her briefcase. Her escape had begun. The heavy oak door, adorned with an ornate iron knocker, yielded with a low groan to her touch. Inside, the manor was a symphony of old-world charm and hushed grandeur. A grand foyer stretched before her, dimly lit by a single flickering gas lamp and the dying embers of a colossal fireplace. The air was warm, imbued with the scent of wood smoke, beeswax polish, and something else, something faintly masculine, a hint of spice and aged paper. It was a scent that stirred a faint, unidentifiable memory in the quiet corners of her mind. "Hello." Ilara's voice, a soft alto, seemed swallowed by the vastness of the space. Her heels clicked softly on the polished flagstones as she stepped further inside, closing the heavy door behind her, sealing out the tempest. There was no response. Perhaps the caretaker had just left or was in another wing. She shrugged off her trench coat, draping it over a nearby antique chair, and ran a hand through her damp, dark curls. The silence, initially welcoming, now felt anticipatory. She moved deeper into the house, drawn by the warmth emanating from the fireplace. It was a magnificent hearth, roaring with golden flames that cast dancing shadows across the high-beamed ceiling of what appeared to be the main drawing room. Plush velvet armchairs were arranged invitingly. A half-empty decanter of amber liquid sat on a polished side table, alongside a leather-bound book with a pair of spectacles resting on its open pages. Someone was definitely here. A knot tightened in Ilara's stomach, a mixture of annoyance at her ruined solitude and a flicker of something akin to curiosity. Her gaze swept over the room, taking in the rich tapestries, the towering bookshelves, and then, finally, landed on the figure sprawled in one of the armchairs, half obscured by the firelight and the shadows. He was asleep, or at least completely still. His dark hair, slightly longer than she remembered, fell across his forehead. A cashmere jumper hugged the strong lines of his shoulders, and one hand, long-fingered and elegant, rested on the armrest, a half-finished glass of whiskey beside it. Ilara felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. Time, that relentless river, had sculpted him, refined him, but it hadn't erased the unmistakable contours of his presence. It was Rhys. Rhys. The name echoed in her mind, a whisper from a lifetime ago, carrying with it the ghost of laughter, the scent of his skin, the memory of a touch that had once set her world ablaze. She stood frozen, a stranger in her own planned sanctuary, watching the man she had loved and lost, now a phantom of the past conjured into solid form by a twist of fate and a booking error. A faint sigh escaped his lips, and he shifted, his head lolling slightly to the side. The firelight caught the strong line of his jaw, the subtle stubble, the familiar curve of his mouth. Her heart, which she'd thought long since hardened against him, gave an unexpected lurch, a traitorous flutter against her ribs. She should leave. Turn around, walk out, call the agency, demand another booking? But her feet remained rooted to the spot, a strange magnetism holding her captive. She hadn't seen him in 7 years. 7 years of carefully constructed distance, of healing, of building a life that didn't involve the ache of his absence. And now, here he was, as if conjured from the depths of her most vivid dreams and most painful memories. As if sensing her presence, his eyes fluttered open. They were the same startling shade of deep-set blue, now clouded with sleep and confusion, then sharpening with an almost imperceptible jolt as they met hers. A silence descended, heavy and charged, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the insistent beat of the rain outside. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, with the past yawning open beneath them. Ilara. His voice was a low rumble, rough with sleep, and it sent a shiver tracing its way down her spine. It was a sound she knew intimately, a sound that had once whispered her name in the darkest hours of the night. "Reese," she managed, her voice a little breathy, a little hoarse. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a telltale sign of her discomposure. He pushed himself upright, his movements fluid and graceful, even in his surprise. The cashmere stretched across his chest, emphasizing the lean strength she remembered so well. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a familiar gesture that instantly brought back a rush of memories, of waking beside him, his hair mussed, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. It wasn't an accusation, more a question born of disbelief. Ilara finally found her voice, a flicker of her old composure returning. "I booked this manor for the weekend. I was told it was available." She gestured vaguely at the room. "Evidently there's been some kind of mix-up." A small, wry smile touched his lips, a smile that still held the power to disarm her. "A mix-up indeed. I booked it a month ago for a writing retreat." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for a fraction too long on her lips, then her eyes. "You look well, Ilara." "And you, Reese?" she replied, her gaze meeting his, holding for a beat longer than was strictly polite. He looked good. Better, perhaps. The years had etched faint lines around his eyes, deepening their intensity, adding a gravitas that was undeniably alluring. He carried himself with an effortless confidence that was both familiar and new. "Come in from the cold," he said, gesturing towards the fire. "You're soaking." She hadn't realized how cold she was until the warmth of the roaring fire began to prickle her skin. She walked towards it, peeling off her damp gloves, suddenly acutely aware of her appearance. Her slightly disheveled hair, the dampness clinging to her clothes. She felt exposed, vulnerable, under his assessing gaze. "There's a phone in the kitchen," he offered, pulling out a chair for her. "You could try the agency. Though I doubt anyone's answering in this weather." She sat down, sinking into the soft velvet, the heat of the fire instantly soothing. The scent of him, subtle and intoxicating, was stronger now, mixed with the warmth of the room. "I suppose not," she murmured, gazing into the flames. "It seems we're stuck." A comfortable silence settled between them, though it was anything but comfortable for Ilara. Every nerve ending felt alive, hyper-aware of his proximity, the way the firelight played across his face, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. The storm outside raged on, a fitting soundtrack to the tumultuous landscape of her emotions. "Can I get you something to drink?" Reese asked, his voice soft, breaking the spell. "There's tea, coffee, or something stronger if you prefer. I found a rather decent single malt in the cellar." He gestured towards the decanter. "A whiskey would be welcome," she admitted, her voice a little steadier now. "Just a small one." He rose, moving with that familiar, unhurried grace, and poured a measure into a crystal tumbler, adding a splash of water. His fingers, as he handed her the glass, brushed hers, sending a jolt of electric awareness through her arm. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the warmth of the glass, the amber liquid swirling within. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip. The whiskey was smooth, warming, spreading a pleasant heat through her chest. It helped to calm the frantic beating of her heart. "So," Reese began, settling back into his armchair, his gaze fixed on the fire. 7 years, Ilara. The simple statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. 7 years, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "A long time." "It is." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes dark and fathomless. "What have you been doing with yourself?" She took another sip of whiskey, buying herself time. Working, writing, living. The usual. She offered a vague, non-committal answer. She wasn't ready to lay bare the intricacies of her life, not to him, not yet. And you? He leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Much the same, though I've moved around a bit, spent some time in Italy, teaching, then back to the UK for a new project. Italy. She remembered his dreams of living abroad, of finding inspiration in ancient stones and sun-drenched landscapes. Teaching what? Literature. Specifically, romantic poet. He chuckled softly. Quite fitting, wouldn't you say? Ilara felt a fresh wave of heat rise to her cheeks. Romantic poets. Their shared love for Byron and Keats had been one of the first things that had drawn them together, a secret language they'd spoken in hushed tones late into the night. I suppose so, she murmured, avoiding his gaze, instead focusing on the way the firelight caught the intricate patterns of the rug beneath their feet. It's strange, isn't it? Rhys continued, his voice softer now, more reflective. Finding ourselves here, like stepping into a dream. Or a very well-orchestrated nightmare, Ilara countered, a hint of her old sharpness returning. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that resonated deep within her. Perhaps a little of both, though I confess, seeing you here is far from a nightmare. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and it made her breath catch in her throat. Don't, she warned, her voice barely audible. Don't what, Ilara? His eyes twinkled with a hint of challenge, a spark of the old Rhys she knew so well. Don't acknowledge that you look breathtaking, even after a journey through a storm? Don't acknowledge the undeniable fact that we are here, together? After all this time? She felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of anger and a dangerous, thrilling excitement. He always had this power over her, this ability to strip away her defenses with a single look, a perfectly chosen phrase. It's complicated, Rhys, she said, her voice strained. Everything between us was always complicated. Was it? He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his eyes fixed on hers. Or did we just make it so? The question hung in the air, heavy and full of unspoken accusations and regrets. Ilara looked away, her gaze sweeping over the familiar lines of his face, the subtle changes, the undeniable familiarity. She remembered the last time they'd seen each other, a tearful, angry parting in a rain-slicked London street, words said in haste and hurt that had carved deep wounds. It doesn't matter now, she said, trying to sound dismissive, but her voice betrayed a tremor. The past is the past. Is it? He challenged softly, his voice a low caress. Or does it linger, like the scent of old books in a library, or the echoes of a song you once loved? He was right, of course. For her, the past had never truly faded. It was a constant hum beneath the surface of her life, a melody she sometimes caught herself humming in quiet moments. The storm outside seemed to grow more violent, the wind howling around the ancient manor, rattling the windows. The fire, however, burned bright and steady, a beacon of warmth and intimacy in the heart of the room. We should probably sort out the sleeping arrangements, Ilara said, trying to inject a note of practicality into the charged atmosphere. I assume there are other bedrooms. Rhys leaned back again, a faint smile playing on his lips. Indeed. Many. The manor boasts 8 bedrooms, all exquisitely appointed. His eyes met hers, a mischievous glint in their depths. Though, given the storm, and the general isolation, I doubt anyone will be joining us. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. They were alone. Truly alone. Ilara felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The idea was both terrifying and undeniably alluring. Being alone with Rhys, in a secluded manor, with a storm raging outside, it felt like a scene from one of their romantic poets, a dramatic stage set for a rekindling or a final, definitive farewell. Right, she said, clearing her throat. Well, I suppose I'll take one of the rooms upstairs. She made a move to rise. Stay, Rhys said, his voice a quiet command that held her captive. Just for a little while longer. We haven't spoken in years, Ilara. Don't you think we owe ourselves at least a proper conversation? She hesitated, her gaze drawn to his. There was a raw honesty in his eyes, an appeal that she found difficult to resist. Her heart, despite her best efforts, was already leaning in, eager to re-engage with this man who had once been her entire world. She sank back into the armchair, the velvet warm against her skin. All right, she conceded, a conversation. But no more dredging up old ghosts, Reese. He chuckled softly. No promises. Ghosts, like memories, have a way of clinging on, don't they? He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze lingering on her over the rim of the glass. Tell me, what are you working on now? Your last novel was brilliant, by the way, haunting. The shift to her work was a welcome reprieve, a safe harbor in the turbulent sea of their history. She found herself talking, describing the intricacies of her current manuscript, a historical fiction set in the Victorian era, involving a complex love triangle and themes of societal constraint and forbidden passion. She spoke with animation, her hands moving expressively, feeling the familiar thrill of sharing her creative world. Reese listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his blue eyes never leaving her face. He asked intelligent questions, probing the depths of her characters and plot, demonstrating the same perceptive insight that had always made him such a captivating conversationalist. He understood her, truly understood the landscape of her mind, in a way few others ever had. As she spoke, she found herself relaxing, the initial shock and tension beginning to melt away, replaced by a comfortable rhythm, a familiar dance of minds that had once moved in perfect synchronicity. The whiskey warmed her from the inside out, and the firelight cast a soft, golden glow over the room, making it feel impossibly intimate. And you, she finally asked, pausing her narrative, what's this new project you mentioned? He smiled, a slow, captivating curve of his lips. It's a collection of essays on the nature of longing, of desire, and the often elusive pursuit of happiness. He paused, his gaze softening, becoming intensely personal. It's inspired, in part, by memories. Ilara felt a flush rise to her cheeks again. She knew with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul that he wasn't just talking about abstract memories. He was talking about thy memories. The unspoken words hung between them, thick and palpable. The air in the room seemed to hum with an electric current, a silent symphony of yearning and regret and a dangerous, undeniable attraction. He finished his whiskey, placing the empty glass gently on the side table. He didn't move, but his gaze remained fixed on hers, a silent invitation, a quiet challenge. The storm outside had begun to subside, the drumming of the rain lessening to a gentle patter, but the storm within Ilara was just beginning to gather force. It's getting late, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, betraying the tremor that now ran through her entire body. The conversation had ended, but the connection, the tension, had only intensified. It is, Reese agreed, his voice a low rumble. He rose from his armchair, moving slowly, deliberately towards her. Ilara found herself unable to move, rooted to the spot by a potent mix of fear and desperate hope. He stopped directly in front of her, the warmth of his body radiating towards her, enveloping her in his familiar scent. He reached out a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment, then gently cupped her cheek. His touch was soft, tender, sending a wave of sensation through her, a warmth blooming deep in her core. Her skin tingled where he touched her, a long-dormant hunger stirring to life. Ilara, he whispered, his thumbs stroking her cheekbone, his blue eyes dark and full of a longing that mirrored her own. Some ghosts, it seems, refuse to stay buried. His gaze dropped to her lips, and Ilara felt her breath hitch. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild drumbeat in the quiet intimacy of the room. She closed her eyes, bracing herself, aching for a touch she had yearned for, consciously or unconsciously, for 7 long years. The whisper of his name, a silent plea, formed on her lips, unspoken. His head lowered, slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. The scent of him, the heat of his touch, the unspoken history between them, all conspired to hold her captive, willing and eager. She parted her lips slightly, a silent invitation, a desperate yearning. And then, his lips were on hers. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle feather-light brush that sent a shiver through her entire being. It was a kiss of memory, of longing, of tentative rediscovery. Elara's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a dizzying rush as her past and present collided in that single, exquisite contact. The taste of him, warm whiskey, and something uniquely Reese, something she hadn't realized she'd so deeply missed, flooded her senses. She instinctively leaned into him, her hand rising to cup his jaw, her fingers tangling in the soft hair at the nape of his neck. The tentative kiss deepened, slowly, exquisitely. His lips gained confidence, pressing more firmly, parting hers with a gentle insistence that she found impossible to resist. A low moan escaped her, a soft, involuntary sound that seemed to unlock something primal within them both. Reese's hand moved from her cheek, sliding down her neck, resting warmly at the base of her throat, before moving lower, coming to rest on her waist. He pulled her gently from the armchair, until she was standing before him, pressed against the solid warmth of his body. The contact was electric, a sudden, powerful reawakening of every nerve ending. Her hands, emboldened, traced the strong line of his shoulders, felt the tautness of muscle beneath the cashmere. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, molding her against him until there was no space left between them. The familiar contours of his body felt like coming home, a paradox of newness and ancient recognition. His kiss deepened further, becoming more insistent, more passionate. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, a silent invitation, and Elara parted them, welcoming him in. The taste of him, the feel of his mouth on hers, was overwhelming, intoxicating. It was a symphony of sensation. The softness of his lips, the gentle rasp of his stubble against her skin, the subtle scent of his cologne mingling with the wood smoke and rain. Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of memories and present desire. She remembered other kisses, in other places, under different circumstances. Stolen moments in moonlit gardens, passionate embraces against cold brick walls, tender goodnight kisses that promised a new morning. But this kiss now was different. It carried the weight of years, the unspoken questions, the undeniable pull of two souls destined to intertwine, even after being torn apart. Reese groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through her, sending delicious shivers through her core. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes, his own eyes dark with a raw, fierce desire that mirrored her own. "Elara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his forehead resting against hers. "God, Elara?" His thumb stroked her cheekbone again, and Elara felt a tear escape, tracing a path down her skin, hot and surprising. Was it sadness? Relief? Or simply the overwhelming force of emotions she had kept locked away for so long? He saw it, his thumb catching the tear, his expression softening with a tenderness that threatened to unravel her completely. "What is it?" he murmured. She shook her head, unable to form words. The storm might have quieted outside, but inside her a tempest of feeling raged. "Too much?" he asked, his voice laced with concern, but his eyes still held that hungry, yearning look. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not too much, just everything." He smiled then, a slow, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Everything," he repeated, his gaze sweeping over her face, as if memorizing every detail. He kissed her again, this time, a softer, more possessive kiss, a claim. Her hands tightened in his hair, pulling him closer, wanting to lose herself in the intoxicating sensation of him. Her body, long dormant, was alive now, humming with an intense awareness. Every brush of his clothing against hers, every intake of his breath, every shift of his weight, was amplified, sending ripples of desire through her. Reese's hands moved from her waist, tracing the curve of her back, pressing her even closer until the hard planes of his chest were flush against the soft curves of hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the steady beat of his heart against her own. Her hips instinctively tilted, seeking the undeniable press of his body against hers, a silent, ancient language of desire. He broke the kiss again, his lips lingering just inches from hers, his gaze burning into her. We should talk, he breathed, the words heavy with effort, as if torn from him against his will. Ilara laughed softly, a shaky, breathless sound. Talk? She whispered back, her voice husky. Is that what we're doing? He chuckled, a low, sensual sound. It's a start, a very good start. His fingers, long and strong, began to trace the line of her collarbone, sending delicate shivers through her skin. He leaned down, his lips brushing her earlobe, his warm breath stirring the fine hairs on her neck. Or perhaps, he whispered, his voice a low, seductive murmur that sent a fresh wave of heat through her, we could simply listen to the whispers. The word whispers hung in the air, a potent invocation. It was the whisper of the wind, the whisper of the dying rain, the whisper of their racing hearts, and the unspoken whispers of desire that had been building between them for hours, for years. His lips trailed down her neck, a slow, deliberate exploration that left a trail of fire in its wake. Ilara arched her neck, giving him freer access, her eyes fluttering closed as she gave herself over to the sensation. His touch was exquisite, a gentle torment that promised so much more. She felt a lightness in her limbs, a delicious languor spreading through her. He reached the hollow of her throat, his lips pressing a soft kiss there, then moved lower, towards the open V of her blouse. The delicate fabric of her silk top felt suddenly oppressive, a barrier she desperately wanted removed. She could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin, the tantalizing brush of his lips. Her fingers, still tangled in his hair, tightened, pulling him closer, desperate for more. The rational part of her mind, the part that screamed caution and restraint, was rapidly dissolving under the onslaught of his touch, his scent, his presence. All that remained was a profound, aching need. Reese, as if sensing her unspoken plea, paused, his lips just above the delicate lace of her camisole. He pulled back slightly, his eyes dark and intense, searching hers. There was a question in their depths, a silent seeking of permission, a profound respect for her unspoken boundaries. Ilara met his gaze, her own eyes wide and shimmering with unshed emotions, with desire. She didn't need to speak. The answer was there, clear and undeniable, in the depths of her soul. She wanted him. She always had. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of profound understanding, of shared longing. He lowered his head again, not to kiss her lips, but to whisper against the sensitive skin of her neck, just beneath her ear. Let's see where these whispers take us, Ilara, he murmured, his voice a low caress, filled with promise and a delicious, intoxicating hint of danger. Her knees felt weak, her body trembling with anticipation. His touch, his words, had ignited a fire within her that threatened to consume them both. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this night, born of a storm and a booking error, was far from over. It was only just beginning. Ilara's breath hitched. His fingers, still tracing the sensitive skin beneath her ear, sent shivers down her spine, a delicate tremor that resonated deep within her core. The scent of him, a mix of rain-kissed leather, warm spice, and something uniquely masculine, enveloped her, intoxicating her senses. She leaned into his touch, an involuntary surrender to the magnetic pull that had been drawing them together since the moment their eyes met. The storm outside raged, a symphony of wind and rain. But within the confines of the cabin, only the silent roar of their burgeoning desire filled the space between them. He didn't move away, but shifted, his body turning more fully towards hers, pressing against her in a way that left no doubt about the heat he felt. A soft groan rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through her own ribs. Ilara, he whispered again, her name a prayer, a question, a promise. His hand slid from her neck, down her shoulder, and gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a small electric touch that made her entire arm tingle. "Come," he murmured, his eyes holding hers in a gaze that was both commanding and tender. He didn't pull her, simply offered the invitation, an unspoken journey laid out before them. Elara, her mind a delightful haze of sensation and anticipation, followed. He led her deeper into the cabin, away from the howling wind at the door, towards the welcoming glow of the fireplace. The air grew warmer with each step, the scent of burning wood mingling with the rain and spice that clung to him. The fire, a vibrant heart of orange and red, cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, making the room feel like a secret haven, cut off from the tumultuous world outside. A thick, plush rug lay before the hearth, beckoning with its promise of warmth and comfort. He released her hand only to help her shed her soaked coat. His fingers brushed against her back as he eased the heavy fabric from her shoulders, sending another jolt through her. She shrugged out of it, the cold, damp material falling to the floor with a soft thud. He took his own coat off, tossing it casually onto a nearby armchair, his movements fluid and unhurried. The simple act of removing a coat became a prelude, a silent stripping away of barriers. Beneath his coat, he wore a dark, form-fitting sweater that hugged the strong lines of his shoulders and chest. The soft wool made him seem more approachable, less formidable, yet the intensity in his eyes remained undimmed. He turned back to her, and his gaze swept over her, lingering on her dress, still damp in places, clinging provocatively. "You're shivering," he observed, his voice lower now, softer, but with an underlying current of something potent. He reached out, his hand hesitantly hovering over her arm, before gently cupping her elbow. "Let's get you warm." He guided her to the rug by the fire. The heat immediately began to seep into her skin, chasing away the chill. She felt herself relax, a sigh escaping her lips. He knelt beside her, his proximity a tangible heat that had nothing to do with the flames. "Better?" he asked, his eyes searching hers, a hint of concern mixed with the raw desire. "Much," she whispered, her voice still a little shaky. She met his gaze, allowing her own vulnerability to show. There was no need for pretense here, not in this storm-bound cabin, not with this man who saw right through her. He didn't speak, but his thumb began to trace lazy circles on the soft skin of her inner arm, just above her elbow. The touch was light, almost feather-light, yet it sent waves of warmth spreading through her veins, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Her breath hitched again, her awareness sharpening to every minute's sensation. The crackle of the logs, the persistent drumming of rain against the window panes, the faint scent of his skin so close to hers. He shifted, bringing his other hand up to cup her face, his palm warm against her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, then down towards the corner of her lips. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat anticipating what was to come. His eyes, the color of rich, dark earth, were pools of intensity, drawing her in, promising a depth she hadn't known existed. "Elara," he said again, his voice barely audible above the fire's murmur. This time, her name was an invitation, a question, a plea. His gaze dropped to her lips, and her own parted slightly in silent invitation. The kiss, when it came, was not sudden or forceful, but a slow, deliberate claiming. He leaned in, his breath warm against her mouth, and then his lips, soft and hesitant at first, found hers. It was a tentative exploration, a gentle press that spoke of unspoken questions and deep respect. Elara responded instantly, her own lips softening, parting further, inviting him deeper. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and the kiss deepened. His lips moved with more confidence, more hunger, yet still with an exquisite tenderness that made her dizzy. Her fingers, without conscious thought, found their way to his sweater, gripping the soft wool, pulling him closer. She tasted him, a clean, faintly spicy warmth that was utterly intoxicating. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes, his own alight with a fierce, burning passion. You taste like honey and rain, he murmured, his voice hoarse with desire. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, still swollen and tingling from his kiss. Then, without another word, he captured her mouth again, this time with an urgency that matched the storm outside. This was no longer a tentative exploration, but a passionate declaration. His tongue sought hers, a tender dance that quickly escalated into a fiery embrace. Ilara met him stroke for stroke, her body arching into his, her hands now tangled in the thick hair at the nape of his neck. The world outside the cabin ceased to exist. There was only the heat of the fire, the intoxicating taste of his kiss, and the dizzying sensation of falling into something profound and consuming. He shifted, his body pressing against hers, and she felt the hard planes of his chest against her softer curves. A delicious ache began to bloom deep within her, spreading through her limbs like wildfire. He broke the kiss, breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. His eyes were closed for a moment, as if savoring the lingering taste of her. When he opened them, they were dark with desire, yet still held a softness that melted her heart. "You are incredible," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned back slightly, his hands still framing her face, his thumbs gently stroking her skin. His gaze dropped to her lips again, then to the pulse fluttering wildly at the base of her throat. "And you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, "are a beautiful danger." A slow smile spread across his face, a truly captivating smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "Danger can be exhilarating, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Especially when shared." He slid his hands from her face, down her neck, and then lingered at the delicate collarbone exposed by the neckline of her dress. His fingers traced the curve, sending shivers anew through her. Her dress, still damp in places, felt heavy and restrictive. She wished to shed it, to feel the warmth of the fire fully, to feel his touch directly on her skin. As if reading her thoughts, his eyes dropped to the fabric clinging to her. "You're still cold, aren't you?" he asked, though his gaze held a question far deeper than simple temperature. Ilara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "A little," she confessed, her voice barely audible. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding beneath the soft wool of his sweater. "Let's fix that." His hands, warm and strong, moved to the zipper at the back of her dress. His knuckles brushed against her spine as he slowly, deliberately, lowered it. The sound of the zipper, a soft rasp in the quiet room, felt incredibly loud, incredibly intimate. As the zipper descended, the fabric of her dress loosened, falling away from her skin. A wave of cool air, then the warmth of the fire washed over her back. He pushed the material gently from her shoulders, letting it slide down her arms. The silk lining whispered against her skin as it came away, pooling around her waist. She stood, feeling suddenly exposed, yet utterly safe in his presence. He knelt before her, his eyes still locked on hers, a silent invitation in their depths. His fingers, ever so gently, pushed the dress down her hips, over her thighs, until it fell to the floor in a silken puddle around her feet. She stepped out of it, a quiet liberation. She stood before him in her slip, a delicate lace-trimmed garment that was both modest and undeniably sensual in the flickering firelight. The fabric, a soft ivory, clung to her curves, hinting at the skin beneath. She felt the heat of his gaze, a tangible caress that made her skin prickle with awareness. His eyes, dark with admiration, slowly traversed her form, lingering on the swell of her breasts beneath the lace, the curve of her waist, the slender length of her legs. He made no move to touch her, simply devoured her with his gaze, and it was more powerful than any physical touch. "Beautiful," he breathed, the single word a profound compliment that made her blush fiercely. She felt a sudden urge to return the favor, to see him as openly as he saw her. She reached out, her fingers hesitantly touching the hem of his sweater. He watched her, a silent question in his eyes. "May I?" she asked, her voice a little shaky, her eyes meeting his. He nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "Please." With trembling fingers, Ilara found the hem of his sweater and began to pull it up. He lifted his arms, allowing her to ease the fabric over his chest, his shoulders, and finally, over his head. The sweater came off, revealing a broad, muscled chest, dusted with dark hair that narrowed to a line down his abdomen. His skin was warm and smooth beneath her fingertips as she reached up to take the sweater from him. He was magnificent. The firelight sculpted the planes of his chest, the tautness of his stomach, the strong line of his arms. Ilara felt a rush of pure admiration, a primal thrill. Her gaze lingered on the strong column of his neck, the powerful shoulders, the defined muscles of his arms. There was a raw, untamed quality to him, an inherent strength that was undeniably alluring. He reached for her, his hands gently pulling her closer until her slip-clad body was pressed against his bare chest. The contact was electric, skin against silk, and the warmth of his body seeped into hers, chasing away any lingering chill. Her hands, still holding his sweater, dropped to the floor, forgotten. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his shoulder, inhaling the musky scent of his skin, a scent now mingled with the fresh air of the storm and the warmth of the fire. He held her close, his arms strong around her, his chin resting on the crown of her head. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, the silence between them filled with unspoken desires and a profound sense of connection. The storm outside continued its wild dance, but within their embrace there was only peace and a growing heat. He shifted, slowly lowering them both to the thick rug before the fire. He eased them down until they were reclining, his arms still around her, pulling her close against his side. The warmth of the fire enveloped them, the flames dancing hypnotically before their eyes. "This is better," he murmured, his voice a low thrum against her ear. His fingers, strong and calloused, began to gently trace patterns on her bare arm, sending delicious shivers through her. Ilara sighed contentedly, burrowing deeper into his embrace. "Much better," she agreed, her voice soft and languid. She felt utterly cherished, utterly desired. He turned his head, his lips brushing against her temple. "I didn't think I'd find you here," he confessed, his voice tinged with a raw honesty. "In this storm, in this cabin die." "And I certainly didn't expect you," she replied, tilting her head back to look at him. His eyes in the firelight were mesmerizing, reflecting the flames like twin embers. "It seems fate has a mischievous sense of humor." He smiled, a slow, tender smile that softened the rugged lines of his face. Perhaps it knew exactly what it was doing. His gaze dropped to her lips again, and this time there was no hesitation. He leaned in, his lips finding hers in a slow, lingering kiss that was both gentle and deeply passionate. His hand moved from her arm, gliding over the delicate lace of her slip, over her ribs, until it rested gently on the curve of her hip. His thumb stroked the soft skin there, a tender, possessive touch that sent a jolt of pleasure through her. Ilara responded with equal fervor, her fingers finding his hair again, tangling in the soft strands, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding. Their bodies, pressed together, moved with a natural rhythm, a silent conversation of desire. He broke the kiss, breathless, his eyes dark with a hunger that mirrored her own. "I want you, Ilara," he whispered, his voice raw, honest. "More than I've wanted anything in a long time." Her heart throbbed in response. "I want you," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, thick with emotion. The words, once spoken, felt liberating, setting free the storm of desire that had been brewing within her since he'd first arrived. He didn't speak, but his eyes conveyed a depth of emotion that words could not. His hand, which had been resting on her hip, now moved with deliberate slowness, tracing the line of her thigh beneath the silk slip. His touch was light, tentative, yet incredibly powerful, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. Ilara arched into his touch, her body responding instinctively to his caress. He continued his exploration, his fingers moving upwards, past the lace trim, until they grazed the bare skin of her inner thigh. A gasp escaped her lips, and her eyes fluttered closed, savoring the exquisite sensation. He watched her, his gaze intense, seeking her permission with every gentle stroke. Ilara's fingers gripped his shoulders, her nails digging lightly into the taut muscle. She wanted him, completely and utterly. The storm outside was a distant roar, a counterpoint to the tempest building within her. He leaned in again, his lips finding the sensitive skin of her neck, just beneath her jawline. His breath was hot against her skin, sending shivers through her. He tasted her there, a soft, open-mouthed kiss that made her knees weak, even as she lay reclining. "You are exquisite, Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her. "Every inch of you." His hand continued its journey, slowly, provocatively, upwards, drawing her deeper into the intoxicating swirl of sensation. The air crackled with unspoken promises, with the electric tension that vibrated between them. The firelight flickered, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the wild beating of her heart. She felt herself unraveling, her inhibitions dissolving in the warmth of his gaze, the heat of his touch. This man, a stranger just hours ago, had awakened a dormant fire within her, a passion she hadn't known she possessed. He was a force of nature, much like the storm outside, and she was willingly, eagerly, letting herself be swept away. He lifted his head, his eyes dark and smoldering, locking onto hers. "Are you ready, Ilara?" he asked, his voice a husky whisper, full of reverence and a thrilling intensity. The question wasn't just about physical intimacy, but about the deeper surrender, the emotional leap they were both about to take. Ilara met his gaze, her eyes shining with a mixture of desire and a nascent love. She took a shaky breath, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. There was no doubt in her mind, no hesitation. "Yes," she breathed, her voice a fervent promise. "More than ready." A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face, a smile that promised both tenderness and passion beyond measure. He leaned in, his lips hovering inches from hers, the heat of his breath a delicious torment. The fire crackled, the rain hammered against the windows, and in the heart of the storm-swept cabin, two souls were on the brink of a beautiful, consuming discovery. The night indeed was only just beginning. His lips met hers, a gentle brush that sent a shiver through her, a current of pure electricity that hummed deep in her core. It was a question, a promise, an invitation, all in one. She answered with a soft sigh, parting her lips slightly, inviting him deeper. And he accepted, his mouth claiming hers with a reverence that belied the building intensity in his gaze. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more. It was soft at first, exploratory, tasting, as if he were memorizing the curve of her lips, the unique sweetness of her breath. Then, as her hands found purchase on his strong shoulders, her fingers digging gently into the taut muscle beneath his shirt, the kiss deepened. It became a hungry dance, a slow, intoxicating swirl of tongues, a meeting of souls expressed through touch and taste. His scent, a primal mix of rain, wood smoke, and his own distinct masculine warmth, filled her senses, intoxicating her, making her dizzy with desire. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw, sending exquisite sensations radiating outwards. She leaned into his touch, utterly lost in the moment, in the intoxicating rush of finally being here, with him, giving in to the undeniable pull that had simmered between them for so long. The storm outside raged on, a wild symphony that mirrored the tempest brewing within her, yet in his arms, she felt an anchor, a profound sense of rightness. When he finally broke the kiss, it was only by a breath, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes, dark pools of desire, gazing into hers. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, a caress in itself. So incredibly beautiful. She couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion, her body trembling with a mixture of anticipation and pure, unadulterated longing. She simply gazed back at him, her own eyes mirroring the fervent promise she had just made. He straightened slowly, never breaking eye contact, and his hands, warm and strong, moved from her face to the delicate buttons of her blouse. Each button he unfastened felt like a slow, deliberate unveiling, a silent act of devotion. His knuckles brushed against her skin with each release, sending a fresh wave of heat through her. When the last button was undone, he paused, his gaze dropping to the V-neck opening, the soft lace of her chemise peeking out. He didn't rush, but savored the moment, making her feel cherished, desired, utterly seen. With a gentle tug, he slipped the blouse from her shoulders, letting it fall silently to the floor, like a discarded whisper. The cool cabin air, though tempered by the roaring fire, kissed her exposed skin, raising goosebumps that had nothing to do with chill and everything to do with the exquisite vulnerability she felt under his unwavering gaze. He took a step back, his eyes tracing the curve of her collarbones, the gentle swell of her breasts beneath the delicate lace. A slow, appreciative smile played on his lips, a silent compliment that spoke volumes. Then, with a mirroring gesture, he reached for the hem of his own shirt. The material stretched taut over his broad chest as he pulled it upwards, revealing the sculpted planes of his abdomen, the tautness of his muscles, the faint trail of dark hair that disappeared beneath his belt. She watched, mesmerized, as he shed his shirt, tossing it carelessly aside. The firelight played over his skin, highlighting the definition of his shoulders, the powerful curve of his biceps. He was a magnificent primal sight, all strength and raw masculinity, and her breath hitched in her throat. He reached for her again, his hands gliding down her arms, lingering at her wrists, then slowly moving up to her shoulders, pulling her gently forward until their bodies were almost touching. The heat radiating from him was palpable, a delicious warmth that seeped into her very bones. His fingers found the straps of her chemise, and with a soft tug, he eased them down her shoulders. The lace fell away, revealing the soft, creamy expanse of her skin. He didn't remove it completely, but let it rest at her waist, a silken whisper against her hips. Her bra, a wisp of lace and silk, was next. His fingers, deft and sure, found the clasp, and with a soft click it sprang open. He gently pushed the cups aside, revealing her breasts to the warm glow of the firelight. Her nipples, already firm and aching, peaked in anticipation. He didn't immediately touch her, but allowed his eyes to feast, a silent adoration that made her feel beautiful, cherished, utterly desired. The air between them thrummed with unspoken words, with the intoxicating scent of arousal and the promise of untold pleasures. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his gaze burning into hers. "Every inch of you." He finally reached out, his hands cupping her breasts, his thumbs brushing lightly over her nipples. A soft gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure pleasure. The touch was exquisitely gentle, yet it ignited a fierce fire within her, a delicious ache that spread through her core. She arched into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed, savoring the sensation. His touch was firm, knowing, exploring the soft weight, the tender curves. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her neck, then moving lower, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. Her head fell back, exposing the sensitive skin of her throat, inviting his exquisite torment. He kissed the hollow of her throat, then moved lower, his tongue tracing a path to the swell of her breast. A whimper escaped her as his warm mouth finally closed over one aching nipple, drawing her in with a gentle suckling motion that sent tremors through her entire body. She tangled her fingers in his hair, holding him closer, her hips instinctively pressing against his. He suckled deeply, rhythmically, drawing out a long, drawn-out moan from her, a sound of pure, uninhibited pleasure. Then he moved to the other breast, lavishing it with the same tender attention, driving her closer and closer to the edge of control. "Let's move to the fire," he murmured against her skin, his voice husky, his breath warm and intoxicating. He lifted her into his arms with surprising ease, a primal gesture that made her feel utterly cherished and protected. She wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his neck, burying her face in the curve of his shoulder as he carried her the few steps to the thick plush rug laid before the fireplace. The roar of the fire was a comforting counterpoint to the thundering beat of her own heart. He lowered her gently onto the rug, settling down beside her, his body a warm, comforting weight against hers. The glow of the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, painting their skin in hues of amber and gold. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the window panes, a rhythmic backdrop to the rising crescendo of their desire. He began to shed the rest of her clothes, his hands moving with unhurried precision, each touch a deliberate act of exquisite torture. Her skirt, a soft cashmere, was eased down her hips, pooling around her ankles. Then her silken briefs, removed with a tender slowness that left her feeling utterly exposed and deliciously vulnerable. She lay before him, completely unadorned, her body shimmering in the firelight, her breath coming in short, quick gasps. He gazed at her, his eyes filled with a worshipful intensity that made her flush from head to toe. "My God," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "you are magnificent." Then, he removed his own jeans, his powerful legs, muscled and strong, revealed to her gaze. He was magnificent, a sculpted masterpiece, and she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated lust course through her. He lay down beside her, pulling her close, his hard body pressing against her soft curves. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure desire that made her arch into him. His hand, warm and calloused, began a slow, deliberate journey. It started at her hip, tracing the delicate curve, then moved upwards, over the silken skin of her abdomen, resting just above the soft, dark curls between her legs. He didn't touch her intimately yet, but the promise of it, the proximity of his hand, made her shiver with anticipation. "Are you warm enough?" he murmured, his breath a sweet caress against her ear. "More than warm," she breathed, her voice a shaky whisper. "I'm burning." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest, a sound of deep satisfaction. His fingers finally delved into the soft curls, exploring the delicate folds, teasing the sensitive skin. She gasped, her hips instinctively lifting towards his touch. He moved slowly, deliberately, learning her body, discovering her secret landscape. His touch was exquisitely tender, yet firm, building a delicious pressure, a sweet ache that spread through her veins. His fingers found her clitoris, and with a soft, circular motion, he began to caress it. A jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure shot through her, making her arch her back and cry out softly. He leaned down, silencing her cry with a deep, passionate kiss, absorbing her gasps and moans into his own mouth. His tongue danced with hers, mirroring the rhythm of his fingers, creating a symphony of sensation that consumed her entirely. She was lost in a haze of pleasure, her body trembling, her senses overwhelmed. The firelight flickered, the rain hammered, and his touch was everything. He continued to tease and torment her, bringing her closer and closer to the precipice, then pulling back just slightly, prolonging the exquisite agony, building the tension to an almost unbearable pitch. "Look at me," he whispered, breaking the kiss, his eyes dark and intense, locking with hers. She opened her eyes, hazy with desire, and met his gaze. In his eyes she saw not just lust, but tenderness, adoration, and a deep, abiding connection that transcended the physical. It was a look that promised to cherish, to protect, to love. "Let go," he urged, his voice a low, commanding whisper. "Just let go with me." His fingers renewed their rhythm, firmer now, more insistent. The pressure built, an intoxicating wave that threatened to consume her. Her body tensed, her breath caught in her throat, and then, with a long, drawn-out cry, she shattered. Waves of pleasure crashed over her, rippling through her, making her entire body convulse. She clung to him, her nails digging gently into his shoulders, her face buried in his neck, gasping for breath as the aftershocks continued to course through her. He held her tightly, murmuring soft endearments against her skin, stroking her hair, allowing her to simply experience the profound release. When her breathing finally began to even out, he lifted her head, kissing her softly, deeply, his eyes filled with a shared triumph. "My turn," he whispered, a playful glint in his eyes. He shifted, rising above her, supporting his weight on his forearms. She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and fervent desire. His body was magnificent, powerful, and utterly masculine. She reached out, her hands tracing the hard line of his jaw, then moving down his neck, over his shoulders, her fingers dancing over the taut muscles of his back. She wanted to feel every inch of him, to memorize the landscape of his skin. He moved between her legs, gently nudging them apart. The sensation of his hard, warm flesh pressing against her still sensitive core sent another jolt of arousal through her. She gasped, arching her hips, inviting him closer. He paused, looking into her eyes, seeking permission, seeking connection. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw with longing. "Please, now." A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face, a smile that promised to fulfill every unspoken desire. He leaned down, kissing her deeply, passionately, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he entered her. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped her lips as he filled her, slowly, completely. The sensation was exquisite, overwhelming, a profound sense of rightness and completion. She wrapped her legs around his waist, drawing him deeper, closer, wanting to feel every inch of him. He paused, allowing them both to adjust, to savor the intimate connection, the profound merging of their bodies. He began to move, slowly at first, a gentle, rhythmic rocking that sent waves of pleasure through her. She matched his rhythm, meeting his thrusts, her body instinctively responding to his every move. The firelight flickered around them, casting their entwined bodies in a golden glow, illuminating the passion etched on their faces. The rain outside seemed to intensify, a wild, primal drumbeat, accompanying the ancient dance of their bodies. He increased the pace, his movements becoming more urgent, more powerful. She cried out, her voice a melody of pleasure and surrender. Her hands tightened on his shoulders, her nails digging into his skin as she rode the wave of sensation, clinging to him as if he were her only anchor in the storm. Their breaths mingled, ragged and urgent, their bodies slick with sweat, their hearts pounding in a furious rhythm. He murmured her name, a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated passion as he drove into her, deeper, harder, faster. Each thrust sent a shockwave of pleasure through her, building, pushing her higher and higher. She felt the familiar tension coil in her belly, tightening, twisting, drawing her closer to the edge once more. "Look at me," he commanded again, his voice raw with exertion, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. She opened her eyes, hazy with pleasure, and met his gaze. In that moment, their souls connected, a profound merging that went beyond the physical. She saw her reflection in his eyes, a woman utterly consumed by desire, by love, by him. With a final powerful thrust, he cried out her name, his body tensing, and then he poured himself into her, a deep, primal release that echoed through her own being. A moment later she followed him, her body convulsing around his, a second, even more profound orgasm rocking her to her core. She clung to him, gasping, trembling, her mind emptied of everything but the overwhelming sensation of pleasure and profound connection. He collapsed onto her, his weight a comforting pressure, his breath ragged against her ear. They lay tangled together, bodies slick with sweat, hearts still pounding, the echoes of their shared climax still vibrating through the air. The fire crackled, the rain softened to a gentle patter, and a profound silence settled between them, a silence filled with the unspoken language of shared intimacy. He rolled onto his side, pulling her with him, spooning her close, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. He pressed a soft kiss to the back of her neck, then rested his chin on her shoulder. "That," he whispered, his voice still thick with emotion, "was beyond anything I could have imagined." She snuggled deeper into his embrace, feeling utterly cherished, utterly loved. "More than ready indeed," she murmured, a soft smile gracing her lips. They lay there for a long time, simply holding each other, listening to the dying embers of the fire, the soft whisper of the rain, and the steady beat of each other's hearts. The storm outside had begun to subside, its fury spent, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. In the aftermath of their shared passion, a deeper connection had forged between them, a bond that felt ancient and unbreakable. He eventually stirred, his hand gently stroking her arm. "We should probably get to bed," he murmured, his voice laced with reluctance. She chuckled softly. "We are in bed, effectively." He laughed, a warm, rich sound that vibrated through her. "True, but a slightly more comfortable version." He rose, pulling her up with him. He didn't bother with clothes, simply wrapped a thick, soft blanket around her, then around himself, and led her to the bedroom. The air in the bedroom was cool and fresh, a pleasant contrast to the heat of the fire. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a hushed silence, broken only by the gentle drip of water from the eaves. He pulled back the covers of the large inviting bed, and they slipped beneath them, still wrapped in the blanket, still tangled in each other's embrace. The sheets were cool against her skin, a welcome relief. He pulled her close again, her back against his chest, his arm draped possessively over her waist, his hand resting intimately on her hip. "Sleep now," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Rest." And she did. She drifted off to sleep, feeling utterly safe, cherished and complete. The scent of him surrounding her, the warmth of his body a perfect comfort. The night was no longer just beginning. It had blossomed into something profound and beautiful, promising a new dawn. Unwind. She awoke slowly, to the gentle kiss of sunlight on her eyelids. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure of where she was, then the warmth of the body pressed against hers, the familiar scent of wood smoke and man, brought it all rushing back. A soft smile bloomed on her face as she remembered the night before. Every exquisite detail, every touch, every whispered word. She shifted slightly, turning in his arms to face him. He was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful, a stray lock of dark hair falling across his forehead. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the faint stubble rough against her skin. He stirred, a low groan escaping his lips, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, his gaze was hazy with sleep. Then it sharpened, focusing on her. A slow, tender smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice raspy with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, her voice soft, filled with an overflowing tenderness. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then to her nose, then finally to her lips. It was a soft, tender kiss, a morning greeting that spoke volumes. "Sleep well?" "Better than I've ever slept," she confessed, snuggling deeper into his embrace. "And you?" "Like a man who's finally found exactly where he's meant to be," he said, his gaze unwavering, full of a deep, heartfelt sincerity that made her heart ache with happiness. The storm had passed completely. Through the large window, she could see a brilliant blue sky, dotted with fluffy white clouds. The world outside was washed clean, glistening with the remnants of the rain. A new day had dawned, fresh and full of promise. They lay there for a long time, simply talking, sharing quiet moments, their fingers intertwined, their legs tangled beneath the sheets. They spoke of the storm, of the cabin, of their lives, but mostly, they spoke of the unspoken, the profound connection that had blossomed between them. He eventually rose, stretching his powerful frame, then pulled on a pair of soft sweatpants. "I'll make coffee," he announced, his voice cheerful. "And breakfast. I'm thinking pancakes." She watched him go, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the sunshine streaming through the window. It was the warmth of contentment, of a deep abiding happiness. She felt light, refreshed, utterly transformed. When he returned a short while later, bearing 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a plate piled high with golden pancakes, the aroma of maple syrup and fresh coffee filled the room. He set the tray down on the bedside table and then joined her back in bed, propping himself up against the pillows. They ate in comfortable silence, savoring the simple pleasure of good food and each other's company. The morning light illuminated the cabin, revealing its cozy charm, the rustic elegance that had drawn her in from the start. But now, it wasn't just a beautiful cabin, it was the sacred space where something truly extraordinary had happened. As they finished their breakfast, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers once more. "This isn't just a storm that passed, is it?" he asked, his voice soft, serious. She looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his feelings reflected in their depths. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This is just the beginning." He smiled, a slow, tender smile that promised a lifetime of such beginnings. "Good," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Because I've been waiting for this beginning, for you, my beautiful ready woman, for a very long time." She leaned in, her heart overflowing, and kissed him deeply, a kiss that sealed their promise, a kiss that spoke of a future filled with passion, tenderness, and an unbreakable bond. The storm had brought them together, isolated them, and in the quiet intensity of that night, they had found each other. And now, as the sun streamed into the cabin, painting the room in hues of gold, they knew, with absolute certainty, that their beautiful, consuming discovery was only just beginning to unfold. The journey ahead, they realized, was going to be the most wonderful adventure of all.